Have you ever noticed how, the moment you share a deeply personal dream with someone, it can feel a little less vivid, almost as if some of its energy has faded? It's a subtle experience, but a familiar one. From a psychological perspective, including ideas influenced by Carl Jung, this shift can reflect how our inner world is shaped by the people and environments around us. We don't exist in isolation. Each interaction we have can influence our mood, our confidence, and even how we see our goals. You might walk into a room feeling clear and motivated, only to leave feeling slightly uncertain after a brief conversation. Nothing obvious may have happened, but internally, something has changed. Jung's work often pointed to this kind of interconnectedness, how our thoughts and emotions can be affected by the subtle dynamics between ourselves and others. When a new idea or desire forms, it can feel delicate at first. It's still taking shape, still finding its footing. Sharing it too early, especially in environments that aren't fully supportive, can sometimes make it harder to hold onto that initial clarity. Not because others intend harm, but because different perspectives and energies can influence how we relate to our own vision. This is why there's value, at times, in giving your ideas a bit of quiet space. It's not about secrecy, but about allowing something meaningful to grow at its own pace. Like many natural processes, development often benefits from a period of protection and patience before being fully exposed to the outside world. You may have noticed that some people leave you feeling more open and encouraged, while others, even unintentionally, leave you feeling more hesitant. Becoming aware of these dynamics can help you decide when and where to share your aspirations. In this light, personal growth isn't a single moment but a gradual process. There's an initial spark, when something meaningful becomes clear to you, and then a period of nurturing that idea internally. Giving yourself the space to explore it without too much external input too soon can help it become more grounded and resilient over time. That spark is still something very tender and full of possibility. In those early moments, an idea or desire often feels complete within you, even though it hasn't taken shape in the outer world yet. From a psychological perspective, including the ideas associated with Carl Jung, this stage can be understood as the beginning of an inner image forming, something that lives first in imagination before it becomes experience. Where things can get challenging is when that early vision is treated as if it already needs to withstand external pressure. In reality, new intentions are often most stable when they're allowed some quiet time to develop internally, without too much outside interpretation or comparison. This doesn't mean hiding your goals out of fear. It simply means recognizing that early thoughts are still taking shape. Like anything in development, they can be influenced by attention, doubt, encouragement, or even casual opinions from others. Some conversations may strengthen your clarity, while others may unintentionally introduce hesitation or overthinking. Jung often used symbolic language to describe psychological development, and one of the recurring themes in his work is the idea that inner processes unfold in stages. Early insight is followed by reflection, integration, and gradual strengthening. In that sense, an emerging desire benefits from a period of internal grounding before it is fully expressed outwardly. The metaphor of growth, whether you think of it as a seed, a creative idea, or a personal intention, can be helpful here. Early development tends to be more sensitive. It's shaped by repetition, imagination, and emotional focus. Giving it space doesn't stop it from growing. It often helps it become clearer and more stable. When you hold something meaningful internally for a while, you also get the chance to understand it more deeply, what it really means to you, what steps it might require, and whether it aligns with your long-term direction. That kind of clarity can make later action more grounded and less reactive. So rather than seeing silence as restriction, it can be understood as a way of protecting your attention while something important is still forming. There's a feeling many people recognize in what you're describing, that sharing something deeply personal can sometimes change how it feels inside you afterward. Psychologically, this can be understood in a more grounded way without needing to frame it as energetic interference or hidden forces. From the perspective of Carl Jung, inner experiences, especially emerging desires, goals, or creative ideas, tend to exist in a very early, unstructured form before they are fully developed. In that stage, they are more sensitive to reflection, feedback, and even our own self-doubt. When you talk about a goal with someone, what often changes isn't the energy of the idea, but your own internal processing of it. Hearing other people's reactions, whether supportive, cautious, or neutral, can activate new thoughts in your mind. Sometimes that strengthens clarity, other times it introduces hesitation or overthinking that wasn't fully present before. This doesn't necessarily mean other people are affecting your dream in a harmful way. More often, it reflects how human cognition works. We naturally integrate feedback, especially from people we trust or respect. A concerned comment from a parent or a practical concern from a friend can shift how realistic or achievable something feels, not because the idea is weaker, but because your attention has expanded to include new perspectives. Jung's broader work often emphasized the importance of turning inward to understand one's motivations, fears, and unconscious assumptions. In that sense, periods of quiet reflection can be useful, not as a rule of secrecy, but as a way of forming clarity before inviting too many external viewpoints. There's also a practical psychological reason people sometimes prefer not to share early-stage goals. When an idea is still forming, it can be more emotionally dependent on your own belief in it. Early external validation or doubt can feel disproportionately strong, simply because the idea hasn't yet been stabilized through action or experience. At the same time, it's not always true that sharing weakens a goal. In many cases, the right conversations can actually sharpen direction, bring useful insight, or provide motivation. The difference often lies in timing and in choosing who you speak with, not in silence itself having any inherent power. So rather than seeing this as a strict rule of protecting ideas from others, it can be helpful to think of it as learning when your thoughts are still forming, and when they're ready to be shaped through conversation. That kind of moment you're describing, where a simple "are you sure about that?" can shift how something feels inside you, is very real in a psychological sense, but it's usually less about external interference, and more about how quickly our own mind absorbs and reprocesses social feedback. From the perspective of Carl Jung, early ideas, desires, or goals often exist in a fragile forming stage within the psyche. In that stage, they're still being integrated into your sense of identity. Because of that, outside opinions, especially from people we trust, can carry extra emotional weight and temporarily reshape how confident or certain we feel. It's not that a single comment has the power to damage a vision in any literal sense. What tends to happen is that doubt gets introduced into your own reflection process. A concerned question from someone else can trigger your mind to simulate possibilities you hadn't fully considered yet, which can feel like your motivation suddenly weakens or shifts. This is also why timing and emotional readiness matter so much when sharing goals. When an idea is still forming, it may be more sensitive to interpretation. Later on, when it's grounded through experience or action, it usually becomes more stable and less affected by outside reactions. Jung's broader work often pointed toward the importance of inner alignment, being aware of your thoughts, motivations, and unconscious influences, so that external input doesn't unconsciously steer you away from what you genuinely want. In that sense, inner work can be understood as strengthening clarity and emotional steadiness, not isolating yourself from others. There's also a helpful balance here. Keeping certain goals private for a time can support focus and reduce distraction, but completely avoiding sharing or feedback isn't always beneficial either. In real life, feedback can refine direction, highlight blind spots, and strengthen execution when you're ready for it. So a more grounded way to frame this is, early ideas benefit from clarity and care, while developed plans benefit from dialogue and refinement. The shift between those stages is often what determines whether outside input feels destabilizing or genuinely helpful. Over time, what tends to matter most is not how much you share or don't share, but how steadily you can hold your direction, even while hearing different perspectives around you. What you're describing is a poetic way of framing a very real psychological process. How intention, focus, and consistency shape behavior over time, and how outcomes eventually reflect sustained action. From the perspective of Carl Jung, much of what we call inner conviction can be understood as alignment between conscious intention and unconscious processes. When someone becomes deeply focused on a goal, they naturally begin to notice more opportunities, make different decisions, and persist longer through challenges. Over time, that can absolutely lead to visible change in their life. The silence you're talking about can be helpful in a grounded sense, not because it has a special external power, but because it can reduce distraction, comparison, and premature validation seeking. When fewer external opinions are shaping your early thinking, you may develop clearer personal direction before acting on it. The next part, embodying it and making choices from a future version of yourself, can also be understood psychologically as identity-based behavior change. People often shift more effectively when they start acting in line with the kind of person they want to become, rather than only focusing on distant outcomes. This is less about reality catching up in a mystical sense and more about consistent behavior gradually producing new results. Where it helps to stay balanced is in the idea that outcomes are not guaranteed simply by belief or internal focus alone. Real-world results still depend on external factors, skills, timing, resources, environment, and sometimes plain chance. Inner conviction can strongly influence persistence and clarity, but it works best when paired with practical action and feedback from reality. The metaphor of fruit appearing later is useful as an image for delayed results, but in practice, what's happening is accumulation, small decisions, repeated effort, and adaptation over time, eventually becoming visible progress. So a grounded way to hold this idea might be: early focus helps you clarify direction. Consistent action builds momentum. Reflection and feedback refine your path. Results emerge as the outcome of that entire process, not just internal state alone. If this resonated with you or gave you a new way to think about your goals and how you approach them, you can like the video. It genuinely helps more people find this kind of content. There's also another video here that goes a bit further into how these ideas can be applied in everyday life. It builds on what we've talked about and offers a more practical perspective on it. You might find it useful if you want to explore the topic a little deeper. Feel free to check it out if you'd like to continue.